Welcome to the Dear NICU Mama podcast. Our mission is to connect the past and the present NICU mom by bringing them out of isolation and into a sisterhood of women who can stand alongside each other as we heal and grow both in and out of the NICU.
Our hope is that through interviews with trauma-informed medical and maternal mental health experts and vulnerable stories from NICU mamas themselves, that you would feel connected to the Dear NICU Mama sisterhood around the world. So, whether your NICU journey was 50 years ago,
or whether you find yourself in the NICU today, we hope that this podcast reminds you that you are not alone. Hi, beautiful mamas. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 3 of the Dear NICU Mama podcast. This week's episode is really special because we are actually resharing an episode we recorded back in Season 4. As we kind of continue this conversation of growing our families after NICU, we wanted to make sure to share this one because it's invaluable for those of us in the community who had maybe a complication or a risk where growing our families was not an option, or B, you've made that decision as a family to be a one and done family. And so as we continue this conversation, we wanted to make sure to honor the moms in our community who are one and done families, and to just reiterate that you are and will always make the best decisions for your family. So we hope that you love this episode. We'll be back next week with a mama story, but we just wanted to hop on here and just say hello, and that we're so grateful that you choose to spend your day listening here with us. So we love you, and we'll be back next week.
Hi, mamas. Welcome back to the Dear NICU Mama podcast. It's your host, Martha and
Ashley. Yay!
I never remember. We did it. I can never remember if I'm supposed to say and or not. So I have a heart attack every time I say the introduction. So thank you for your constant grace.
And then we kind of went through that period where we were sharing our last names. So we just didn't know what we were sharing about ourselves for a while.
Right. Yeah. And next week we're going to do our social security numbers. So that's where we're at.
Tune in.
Tune in next week. So mamas, you know that oftentimes we'll get to interview experts in the field of neonatology and mental health on this podcast, or we get to chat a bit with NICU moms themselves, hear about their journeys. And today we kind of have like a very cool hybrid of professional, personal journey. And today we have Jess Myhre here. Can you say hi, Jess?
Hello, folks. I'm so glad to be here.
Jess is a preeclampsia mom, had her baby about 4 weeks early. Yeah. An adorable baby named Penny, who's going to be 2 soon.
So cute.
And the coolest thing is that she and her husband Pierce actually have a podcast, the Only You, a one and done podcast, all about this idea of what it means to have a single child in your life and make that choice, not make that choice, all the things that lead to that life. Gosh, how many times, Ashley, have people like, when are you going to have another? Like when we're in the NICU and like in a war zone, and they're like, when are you going to have another?
Yep.
Seriously.
Well, and we've been kind of talking about this Life After NICU series, and we wanted to make sure to touch on this topic because it's very sensitive and it's very tender. And we know that for many of you mamas listening, the decision of how and when and if to grow your family isn't just a decision you make overnight. It's a decision that takes a lot of consultations, a lot of healing, a lot of inner healing and physical healing. And so we wanted to have this conversation with a mama who has journeyed through that herself and has really made it her mission to create a safe space for moms with only one child. And so, Jess, we're so excited to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I think what you two are doing is so important, and especially for folks on that one and done path, either by choice or through circumstances outside of their control. They could really use a resource like this. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. I love the beauty of the internet in that it connects us together. You know, like I think about how we have different missions and yet our hearts are the same. And so I'm so grateful for those little squares on Instagram that connected us.
Yeah, it was so fun. Ashley sent me your page and she was like, oh my gosh, we have to have her on the podcast. And I immediately like absorbed everything, was like snooping on your Patreon page and stuff, because you have, I think, something we share, which is like, of course, all these topics are so heavy and they they weigh on us as people, but sometimes levity and joy and peace can be found. And I think you and Pierce do a really good job of that. You and Peace, ooh, Freudian slip.
Ooh. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It was really born of the need and the desire for a community, and there wasn't one. There was maybe a couple of really good meme pages about being one and done, but there wasn't really a safe space to talk about it. And so I really, really needed that resource, and I couldn't find it, so I made it.
Yeah.
Yeah, good for you.
So
Oh,
cool. Well, can we backtrack a little bit, Jess? You talk very openly about your own preeclampsia journey and all of that entailed. And so, would you be willing to share with us just a little bit of your motherhood journey here?
Sure. How much time do you have? I'll make it short. I had a pretty easygoing pregnancy. The 20-week scan revealed that she was a little bit on the small side. She had like some kidney stuff going on. So we had extra scans for her. It was my first and only pregnancy. And at the time, we thought we would probably be having several kids. And I actually really enjoyed being pregnant. It was not hard. I even remember discussing with my girlfriends the idea of perhaps being a surrogate someday
Mm,
because I liked it. And after the 20-week scan, we were getting a lot of extra attention. We were doing scans every 4 weeks because I also had, oh, I don't remember what it's called. Basically, the umbilical cord was attached to my placenta, like right at the edge. Marginal
mm,
cord insertion, it's called. So
mm,
it wasn't like there was a possibility that the nutrients weren't going to reach her. And that did end up being the case because every scan, she kind of got smaller and smaller. And
mm,
looking back, that's actually a risk factor for preeclampsia that is being researched right now is placental issues and
mhm, mhm,
growth restriction. So I think it was the 35-week scan that we did. We went in for an ultrasound, and I had just been to a wedding, and I remember feeling so tired. I was
mm.
exhausted, but I had never been 35 weeks pregnant in July before, so I thought it was normal.
Right.
And I remember just staring at this picnic table at the wedding and wishing that I could just lay down and go to sleep on it. Like, that's how desperate I
Mm,
was to rest. And,
mm,
everybody was catering to me. It was fine. It was hot. I was drinking water. So anyway, a couple days later, I go to the doctor and they take my blood pressure and then they
mm,
take it again and
mm,
then they take it a third time and they sort of just like make note of it. They do the scan and Penny had dropped down to like the fifth percentile
mm,
of growth and my blood pressure was just off the charts. It was like
mm,
210 over, I don't even know, 110. So it was just really, really high. And I had no idea. I mean, having preeclampsia, there's really no way to know unless you take your blood pressure. There's no real symptoms. So I was just shocked when they said, I remember the maternal fetal medicine doctor like looked at me and she with like a little tear in her eye because we had met so many times before. It was like, Jess, I'm so sorry, but you need to go to the hospital right now. You're having your
mm,
baby and you're not going to leave the hospital until you do. You're really,
mhm,
really sick. And that I don't know, luckily, because of my anxiety that already existed, I had already packed my go bag and Pierce was in his work clothes. Like, we were both set to go to work right after that. We both called in, like, "So
yeah.
that maternity leave we've been talking about, I'm gonna need to
Right.
start that today." Um, so we go to the triage and they keep taking my blood pressure over and over again. It's not going down. They get me on labetalol, which is a blood pressure medication to try to stabilize it. I get a steroid shot in my back immediately, which is like going from I'm just like a happily pregnant woman to like I'm getting a literal shot in my back right
Mhm,
now and I'm going to have my baby soon. That was pretty jarring.
mhm,
So we
mhm,
spent the next 5 days trying to stabilize my blood pressure. Penny was having a hard time with her heart rate as the induction medications were happening. So we had to keep a really close eye on her. And there was the ever looming threat of a C section, just
mhm,
anytime something would go wrong. And I started getting some visual disturbances. I was on magnesium. I don't really remember
Mhm.
my birth very well. It's all it's like a
That
dream.
magnesium, we call it a
Oh,
swear word. Like, we're kinda grateful for it because it protected us and baby, but also, like, it's the worst.
oh, it's horrible. Oh my
Yeah.
God. I've never been so uncomfortable, and like the Pitocin
Mhm.
and the combination of all the drugs, I was shaking so much that it was
Mhm.
uncontrollable. It was like having the shivers.
Yep,
Um,
yep.
and I don't know, you just at the time, I thought this is just what you have to do to have a baby. This
Mhm.
is it. Like I don't know. I don't know anything different. I'm assuming all women have to stay in the hospital for 5 days just to try to get the baby to come out. And all I cared about was her surviving.
Mm.
And I didn't care
Mhm.
about myself at all. I just needed her to be okay. So finally, I delivered her. She was about 4 pounds. Um, she was fine. She was doing really well. They sent us home the next day.
Wow.
And I remember saying to the doctor who was doing my discharge paperwork, I was like, "Do you want to take my blood pressure again?" And they were like, "No, you're fine." I
Mhm.
was like, "Okay." So we go home, and Penny wasn't doing very well. So we did her first visit with the pediatrician, and they were basically like, "Sorry, guys, you need to go back to the hospital right now. I've called them. They have a
Mhm.
room ready for you. You need to go now." Because
Mm.
she had like crystallized urine. She was very, very dehydrated. Apparently, my milk
Mm.
hadn't come in,
Mm.
and her jaundice was really bad.
Mm.
And we were shocked. It was just another thing. And so we went to the hospital, and we stayed there for about 2 or 3 weeks in the NICU.
Mm.
Or it was called something else.
The
It's like
PICU?
the PICU.
Yep.
Yeah. So she had to do the jaundice stuff. But
Mhm.
then also while we were there, they found out she had like a heart issue.
Mm.
And the whole time we're there, I was not feeling 100%. Um, I was feeling really sick, and I was postpartum, so I'm like in there changing my gauze and like doing all of this stuff because I did have a
Mhm.
natural birth. And I was not feeling great, but I didn't even check my own blood pressure because nobody told me to. And
Mhm.
also, I didn't care. Like I just needed her to be okay. She was fighting for her life in there.
Mhm.
And she developed hypothermia at one point,
Mm.
because she was just
Oh
so
my gosh.
little that
Yeah.
she just couldn't regulate her own temperature. So just like everything was being thrown at us, and we were talking about heart surgery, and we were talking about all of these really horrifying, scary kidney procedures. Like
Mm.
things were really rough, and I had to keep the blinds drawn because my visual disturbances came back, and I was getting these
Mm.
headaches. And looking back, I was sick,
Mhm.
and I just didn't care. I just needed her to be okay. So finally, my mom dragged me out of the hospital and took me to the emergency room to get my blood pressure taken. And of course, it was back up off the charts again. I had
Mhm.
postpartum preeclampsia. So they
Mhm.
admitted me, and I was just like, I need to get back to my child. Like, she
Mhm.
is in the PICU. I need to go. And so the doctor was so nice, and they did intravenous Pitocin, or not Pitocin, whatever the blood pressure medication is that you do intravenously that's not magnesium, thankfully. They got it stabilized, sent me with a bunch of medication, and said, "Fine, go back to the PICU." I
Mhm.
swear I would have just pulled it out and left. Like I was not
Mhm.
staying.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So finally we got through it. We got to the end of our journey at the PICU, took her home, and for months after that, I felt like I never left.
Mhm.
I was so scared all the time. I didn't trust her body. I didn't trust my body. I didn't
Mhm.
trust myself as a parent.
Mhm.
Um, I just felt extremely depressed and scared and anxious. And it wasn't until a couple months later that I was diagnosed with PTSD from the
Mhm.
experience, and started doing talk therapy. I would just take her with me, because it's
Mhm.
lonely. I mean, Pierce had to go back to work
Mhm.
at the very end of our PICU stay because he only got 3 weeks off. So it was just like me alone with this baby who proved to me that she was like at risk for everything all the time.
Mhm.
And nobody really understood what that feels like when you meet this baby and they're immediately fighting for their life.
Yep.
And so are you. It's really jarring. So pretty much within the first couple of weeks, I had decided I wanted to be one and done. I was like, I am not doing that again. And
Yeah.
Right.
then at the 6-week checkup, the doctor told me, because I had postpartum preeclampsia as well, that my blood pressure would probably always be a problem. And any subsequent pregnancy had a pretty high risk, something like 50-50, of having preeclampsia again. And that's when we kind of decided for sure that it wasn't worth the risk for us.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I know Ashley feels the same way, but like it's always an honor to hear moms talking about the most vulnerable days of their life. But thank you for doing that, because I think people forget listening that it's like not a chore. It's a pretty big chore to like relive and process all of
Sure.
it too. So thank you. And I can't help but thinking too about like what you said. Like I didn't know any different, and it just really speaks to the idea that we really just assume that, it's just, I guess it's going to be hard and we just know different, and at what point, in conversations with others, maybe your mom or friends, family about their deliveries, did you realize that maybe there was a really stark difference?
I think it was my first mom group I went to. And I've heard this from other moms as well, where everybody's going around talking about their birth experiences.
Yeah.
And you're like I said at the
Martha and
top
I
of
are
the
like,
show, how much time do you have?
Yeah. And their eyes get really big and you're like,
Yeah.
oh shoot, I just said the wrong thing.
Right. Like, I'm not trying to scare you all out of having a second or anything, but this is what happened to me. I think
Yeah.
meeting other moms, talking to other moms, I just started to feel like the outlier. I started to feel like the one whose body couldn't handle pregnancy, the one whose body failed them and their baby. And I carry, less so now, especially in the beginning, I carried a lot of shame and a lot of guilt because I blamed myself for all of her health issues. Anytime we'd have to go to the cardiologist or the urologist, or anytime her weight was too low and we had to supplement, I was pumping for the first 3 months and nursing. So I was just like really trying to get her weight up. Anytime anything would go wrong, I would blame myself. And because it's like, it's my body that did this to her. I couldn't even do the one thing that the woman's body is supposed to be able to do, which is produce a child. I couldn't do it. So I carried all this horrible shame. And it took a long time for me to kind of forgive myself, I think, and forgive my body.
Absolutely. Well, and I echo what Martha said. We just appreciate your vulnerability and your willingness to go to those deep places with us. And I know our moms are so appreciative as well. And I think you also articulated really well that, for moms who have, quote, normal, we always use quotations, quote, normal pregnancies and deliveries, you don't have to think about future pregnancies so early. Like you deliver your child and you know that, like, okay, now I'm going to give myself maybe a year or a couple of years to even have to think about the fact of growing our family. When we go through these traumatic births, it's like you basically deliver your baby and you're already thinking, like, can I do this again? Is this even possible for me? And you start this grieving process of growing your family pretty instantly.
Yeah.
And so I know you kind of said it was pretty obvious right away when your doctor said at 6 weeks, but when did you start that grieving process of like, wow, this isn't going to be simple for us and maybe not a possibility?
I think I started it early, and I think I'm still in it in some
Yeah.
ways. I
Yeah.
think I know that there are certain things that trigger it. Getting rid of baby clothes,
Yes.
every little milestone, knowing the first thing is also the last thing. I think the grieving process doesn't necessarily ever stop.
Yeah.
And I think you find ways to cope with it, especially if that wasn't your journey. And then part of our mission for the podcast is to remind ourselves and remind everybody else that there's a lot of positives along with it too. And when we began the podcast, I truly naively thought it was going to be about only children. I thought it was going to be a podcast about only kids. And it's so not. It's a podcast about parents. It has nothing to do with the kids.
Right.
'Cause, like,
Right.
spoiler alert for anybody who's not listened, the kids are fine. Like, only children, they're good. You don't have to worry about them. We have only children write in all the time, and they're good. Like, there's not that much depth there. But the surprising thing is that it's actually more about the parents and how we cope with
Yeah.
dealing with the fact that our family is not going to look like what we thought it would. And that can come
Mhm.
from a traumatic birth, of course. It can also come from secondary infertility. It can come from the dissolution of a marriage. It can
Mhm.
come with health issues, cancer.
Mhm.
I mean, it can come from a lot of different places, but the grief is what kind of unites us. So
Mhm. Yeah.
I would say that that grieving process is it's going to be there, I think, for me for a while. But what I'm able to do is like the gratitude process is like leveling at the same. So if
Mhm.
I can sort of match that grief with the gratitude, I'm able to find a certain amount of peace with the situation.
Yeah.
I imagine too, and we know this so well from the NICU community, is that um, communion, meeting other people and saying, I know that, I see you, I feel like that
Mhm.
too, is one of the places that gratitude can come from. It's one of that can spur it. Because, like you said, the conjoining the commonality there is expectation versus reality,
Right.
for everything from the birth trauma to the delivery to life afterwards. So
Mhm.
you speak to that so well, and I love the variety of the families that you talk with and get to work with in the community too. I think it's so
Mhm.
important to highlight all of those. Um, so you talked a little bit about it. What was even the conversation of, hey, I think we should start a podcast, Pierce. I know you got a full-time job, but you got a real nice beard and it's perfect for podcasting.
Well, to be honest with you, I think that it was one of many podcasts born out of the pandemic because he
Mm.
didn't have a full-time job and neither did
Yeah.
I.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've always been a huge fan of podcasts. I actually listen to more comedy podcasts than anything. I remember right after giving birth, I was listening to a lot of like birth story podcasts, trying to kind of like reckon with what happened. And I would always wait till the end and I would hope that they would say, and then we decided to be one and done. And they never
Mm.
really did, like I never got that validation that I was hoping to find. They would always say, like, we're not sure when we're going to plan to have the next baby, or it wasn't really like a conversation they were having. And I would always kind of subconsciously wish that somebody out there would say, we're not going to roll these dice again. And we're
Mm.
deciding to be one and done because of what happened to us. And it was it was hard for me to listen to those birth stories because I was always feeling like, okay, so they went through something worse than me, or they went through something similar to me, and they can just do it again, and I can't. And it's again that shame, like, what is wrong with me? A lot of women have difficult births, but just me, I can't do it again. And people saying my daughter's going to be lonely, people saying I'll regret it, all of these horrible things. That was all just reeling in my head, and I'm one of 5. So I didn't have anyone to talk to about this. So I listen to a lot of comedy podcasts or like Radio Lab or definitely not in the motherhood space at all. And I think it shows in my podcast. We have like the pop culture segment. We're like very like silly.
Yes. But that's
That's
good
good
though,
though.
because it can't always be like, today we'll be
Yeah.
talking about the
Yeah. There
devastation,
has to be
right?
some joy and humor in it too.
Yeah, and we, like, almost never talk about Penny, like, it is just not a parenting podcast. But anyway, so I think through the pandemic, I was like, "I wanna start a podcast. Anybody can do it." And I had all these
Yeah.
different ideas. I wanted to do I know a lot about records. So it's like, I could do a music podcast, or I could do a gardening podcast. My sister owns a farm. Maybe she'll do a farming podcast with me. I had all these ideas. I wanted to do a Freaks and Geeks rewatch podcast. Like, I had tons of thoughts. And Pierce is used to my personality where I just wake up with a wild hair. And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Hey, we're gonna change our lives today, and here's how." I'm just that person. So I woke up one day and was like, "I think we should do a podcast about being one and done. There's nothing like it. Nobody's talking about it. I think we
Yeah.
should talk about it." And luckily, Pierce, being the perfect partner for me that he is like, "Okay, how? How do we do it? Let's buy the microphones."
I
And
love it.
so he's just so supportive. And I've talked about this before too, that he is pretty neutral on being one and done versus having more. If it were up to him, I think he'd probably go for 2, maybe 3.
Mm.
but he realizes that it's not up to him because it's
Mm,
my body. And he loves having Penny, and he
mhm,
has no issues with being one and done. So it's not like
mhm,
he's passionate about it in the way that I am. It's more just like he's incredibly supportive and realizes that at the
mm,
end of the day, it is my call to make. And
mhm.
he's just there for me. So I'm really, really lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so beautiful. And I can imagine, because I know Martha and I feel this way, that something that you create also ends up changing your life. And so, in what ways has
LOL.
in what way has Only You podcast and your mission, really helped you flourish in your motherhood journey? And how have you grown because of the community that you've been building?
Wow, that's a great question. I've never been asked that before. Um, I've made some really incredible friendships, which has been great.
Mhm.
I've also, and it's funny, when we first started this, I told you both that I was just fresh out of a therapy session,
Yes.
which I talk about very openly. Like, yes, I'm in therapy, and yes, it helps a lot. But I'm I'm just turned 30, and my identity has shifted,
Mm,
where a lot of my identity is being a mother,
mhm,
where most of my life my identity was about going to shows and being like a young, cool person in the world. Like my
mhm,
identity was not in this space at all. So the podcast has given me this really extraordinary opportunity to like cultivate this new person that I have become
mm,
and make it in a way that it doesn't consume my personality, but instead it like accentuates the personality I had before. The
mm,
person who always wants to bring people together, the person who wants to host the party, the person who wants people to talk about what's really going on, the person who hates
mhm,
small talk.
mm,
Like it's
mhm,
allowed me to become the type of mother who wants other mothers to feel like they can still be who they are while dealing with all these new things that come up. So I
yeah,
think in a way it's really given me this like creative license within
mm,
motherhood to make it whatever I want it to be. And I feel so supported by all
mm,
of these men and women who come out of the woodwork to tell me like nobody was talking about this. Thank you.
mhm,
Thank you.
mhm,
And it just gives me this sort of creative license, I think.
mhm. I love that. That's beautiful.
Just piggybacking on that, I hope that's okay if I ask this,
Of
but
course.
sometimes people will write to us as if we're authorities who know anything, which is funny. And I'm sure that people write to you and they're like, "How do I know?" Right? Or things like that, like
Constantly.
for advice. And in the realm of trauma, there is no right or wrong way, and often it's going to be a real gray answer. So, how do you
Yes.
often answer those questions?
I always say to look within, to imagine your family 5 years from now. You're sitting around the table at a dinner and you're feeling as joyous as you can. This is one of those euphoric moments where you look around your space and you think like I have it. I have what I've
Mm,
always wanted. Who's there? Is your spouse there? I hope so. Do you have one, two, three kids? Are the grandparents there? Are your friends there? Is there someone that like you imagine when you close your eyes that would like really fill your cup to see around that table? And try to really imagine that. And if it does have two or three or more kids, maybe you're not done. And maybe it's time to have the conversation of like, how can I safely have another pregnancy? What do I need to do to support my own mental health, my own physical health, to start the surrogacy process, the adoption process, what have you? If it's just your only and that feels good, then I think you're probably there. Yeah.
mm,
Like when
mhm,
I picture Christmas 5 years from now, it's not just me and her and Pierce. It's me, her, Pierce, her grandma, Omi. It's all of our friends. It's the cousins are running around,
mhm,
but it's certainly not me with with a baby belly. It's not me. Having another pregnancy or another newborn experience. So in those moments, that's when I feel the most sure. And then I tell them, if you're not able to really, like, if that's still a little bit unclear, then always, always go to therapy. Talk to a
Mhm.
neutral third party who doesn't have a vested interest on whether or not you have another one. Don't talk to your mom who
Yeah,
wants another
yes.
grandbaby. Don't talk
That's
to
good,
your,
yeah.
friends who
Mhm,
have 3 and want you to have 3. Talk to someone neutral whose job is to make sure that you're okay and to make sure that
mhm.
you're getting what you need. And I'm not a trained therapist. So I that's all I can really offer. And I just
Yeah,
always am encouraging people to talk to a therapist.
mhm. I think that's such a good point of talking to that neutral party, like you said, because of course, when your friends want you to grow your family, of course they want to see you have multiple. It's like that's just natural. But I love that you affirm that, talk to somebody who has no vested interest if your family grows, but really cares about you and your health and who you are. And so
Right.
I think that's really beautiful.
Well, sometimes other parents can say things like, they don't mean it to be hurtful, and it
Right.
is. So
Right.
even your
Right.
closest friends might say something like, "Oh, you'll be fine. Oh,
Right.
that won't
Oh,
happen
it won't have. Yeah.
again. Come on.
Yes.
There's no way that can happen twice." Or like, I have a friend who had preeclampsia once.
Right.
The second kid was fine. It's like,
Right.
okay,
Right.
that's not as helpful as you think it is.
Right.
So I've already beat the odds a couple of times in a not great way. So the odds
Right.
aren't really in my favor.
Right, right. Well, and I think that that simple illustration really gives moms permission to really ask themselves what they want too, versus like maybe what they feel pressured to or
Right.
what they thought growing their family would look like. And it really just quiets your heart and is like, what's best for our family? And how do we make those decisions that honor our family as best we can? And so
Yeah, I mean,
I
in
love
a
that.
way, it's like it's a moment that moms don't give themselves permission to have very much, which is like, I'm not thinking about what's best for my child because I know in my heart that I'm doing everything I can for them. I'm not
Mm,
thinking about what society says children need, which is 2 to 3 siblings. I'm not thinking about people who say I'm not a real mother if I don't have more than one. I'm
mm.
not yeah, that happens.
Ugh,
Uh,
ugh.
I'm not thinking about any of that. I'm simply thinking, what do I want? And allowing yourself that just so brief selfish moment.
Mhm,
Selfishness is such an interesting concept when it comes to parents because we're told that as soon as you have that child, or even really as soon as you become pregnant, it's not about you anymore. It has, your life is no longer about your needs. It is 100% for them. And I think that's really a dangerous territory for humans, just because what are you modeling for your kid? What are you
mhm,
showing them? That as soon as you become a parent, your needs no longer matter? I,
mhm,
I don't want her to think that. My daughter's a woman, so it's even more like, I need you to see that moms are allowed to put themselves first sometimes. And
mhm,
part of that for me is not being pregnant again.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think too, it's really part of that whole idea of identity as well, because it's a pretty devastating transition if you get to the point where you're like, maybe you're struggling, right? I struggled after we brought my daughter home, and I'm thinking, so this is my job, and this is all I'm going to do is give everything to her all the time, and that's it, and I'm not doing well with it, and I'm not happy, so peace, bye. It just doesn't, it's just, it can be, you're like you said, it can be dangerous and shame inducing because that's such an unrealistic expectation of anybody,
Yeah.
right? Because you cannot function as a human being if you don't have like sleep and
Right.
food and
Correct.
joys in life, right?
Mhm.
Exactly. I think
Yeah.
it's so important to be able to model, both as moms and dads, what it's like to take care of yourself. Your kid needs to see that
Mhm.
because they need to know that their self-worth is not wrapped up on who they're taking care of that day.
Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, and to kind of piggyback off of, Martha was talking about questions, that infamous question of, "So when are you gonna have more?" How do you answer that question? Let's say
Well,
Karen in the grocery store sees Penny and she's like, "Oh, she's so cute. When are you gonna have another one?" How do you respond?
I have a few, it
Okay.
depends on my level of sassiness that
There you
day.
go.
It depends on, like, my mood, and also, I think it's really important that we are careful about what we're saying in front of our kids.
Absolutely.
So, as much as I would like to say, "I almost died having this baby," I don't really need her to carry that. You know, like, I don't
Amen.
need her
Yes.
to think to herself, like, "I almost did that to my mom." Like, that's really not for her to carry. So if
Mhm.
Penny is with me, I always try to just, like, kinda laugh it off. Um, and I always say something along the lines of, like, "Why is that your business?" You know?
Mm.
Like, "Who asked you?" Because it really does put it right back into their court. Like, "Why am I asking this stranger?" You know? Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
I said recently on a podcast all about clapbacks. I said, "One thing I'd really love to say that I haven't yet to someone, it would be really perfect for, like, an acquaintance, you know, somebody you knew in high school or something. I would love to say, 'Oh my gosh, I didn't realize we were there in our relationship because I have some thoughts on your life that I would love to share.'"
I love that.
But I think people don't ask me very much because I tend to have, like, "F you" written across my forehead when I'm out. People just
Sure.
don't approach me,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
great. But I think that just turning it back onto them and being like, "What makes you think you can ask me that?" You know, like, what did I do to make you feel like that's any of your concern? She's fine. She's happy. She's healthy. Maybe work on not asking that, you know, or it could even be a teachable moment. Like, if I'm in the mood to be a little bit more gracious, I might say, you know, we're not planning on having another child. And I'm fortunate that I haven't experienced pregnancy loss, but you should really be careful who you're asking that to because a lot of parents try for another and they lose their pregnancies and it's devastating. And you really don't know what that person has gone through. So I think you should be careful about that question in the future. And you're lucky you asked me and not somebody for whom it would be devastating.
Mhm.
Like, make it a teaching moment. Make it a moment where you're like, "Hey, man, be careful about that." I
Mhm.
remember when I was very visibly pregnant at work, a guy was like, "Hey, you got a baby coming, huh?" And I just looked at him and I was just sort of like, and it made him rethink the question where he was like, "Don't you? Don't you have a baby coming?" And I let it sit for a little while. I really let him sweat, and then I was finally like, "Yes, I do." But in the future, you might reconsider that question because you really don't know, and it's truly not your business. And
Mhm.
I just, because I'm able to have that confidence, I really just try to speak up for those who don't. And
Mhm.
it's not their fault because they may have been through something really, really hard. Um, but it's definitely a work in progress. I'm certainly not perfect. And
Mhm.
it does make me nervous to take my own child out in the world, and that sucks because
Mhm.
it's something so many people don't have to think about. Like, I just wanna go to the grocery store. I just wanna go to the farmer's market or the park, and I don't wanna have to talk about my preeclampsia, or I don't
Right.
wanna make this a feminist issue right now. I really
Yeah.
just wanna enjoy my day.
Right.
Oh man, I love that though. And I'm gonna write these down. These are fantastic.
I
Well, and
think
I think context to relationship is so important too, you
Mhm.
know?
yeah,
It's like your responses to Karen in the grocery store will be so different than to a best friend who genuinely wants to know how you're feeling
right.
about growing your family.
Absolutely.
So I love having those sassy cards ready though for for
Totally.
those other ones.
When it comes to your best friend or a family member, I can definitely be a lot more gracious, but at the same time, I can sort of be like, "You know what we've gone through. Like,
Mhm.
you know that's a question on my mind." And, you know, starting a podcast about being one and done really stops all those questions from your friends and family. But I think what I would tell somebody to say if, like, perhaps their mom or a friend or a sibling won't stop bringing it up is I would always just say, like, I'm gonna put up a boundary that you no longer ask that. It's not like, it's not an easy thing for me to talk about, and I'd rather you just kinda respected where I'm at. If I wanna talk about it, I'll bring it up to you, but I just
Mm,
wanna put up this boundary with you right now that it doesn't feel good, and it's a little triggering for me. So, if you don't mind, just respect that boundary, and like any boundary in life, if they continually cross it, then maybe it's time for a little timeout. You know, like maybe it's time to look up the old gray rock method and make it the most boring conversation you've ever had with a person where you just give them one word answers until they figure out a way to talk to you with respect. Um, I think in-laws can be some of the most difficult people in navigating this because you want them to like you, but at the same time, you want to be able to have a boundary with them. So I think using that word boundary is really powerful. It's not something older generations are used to hearing, but they need to get used to it. And I think it's a good thing to model for your kid as well. Like, hey, I'm putting up a boundary right now, and I need you not to cross it.
Yeah. Well, I think then what would be really interesting is all the time on this podcast and with our moms, we talk so much about the grief that of losing the choice, right? And that's where it really kind of irons out to, is that we don't have the choices or the options we thought we had before. And that really can accompany birth trauma and NICU trauma, things like that. And as much as we want to honor and hold space for that, we also kind of love how you bring up this idea of, well, what are the benefits? What are some of the joys? Like, what are some of the things that can bring us hope and encouragement in this journey of one and done? Can you speak to some of the misconceptions and fears and how you respond to those?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one thing is that your child is going to be selfish or your child is going to be lonely. Those are the two things that people are very concerned about. Basically, that your child will not be given the social skills to navigate through this world like they would with a sibling. And in some ways, that's not incorrect. If your child spends its whole childhood with you alone, it will definitely be missing out on some fundamental building blocks for socialization. But you have to remember that school exists, and you have to remember that organized sports exist, and you have to remember that friends exist. So another like little clapback that I like to say is like there has to be ways to socialize my child without involving my uterus, right? Like there's other ways. And so
I love that.
there's there's sports, there's clubs, there's a lot of ways that you can make sure your kid gets good opportunities to hang out with other kids their age because they need to experience conflict. They don't need to experience only having a friend. They need to experience arguing with a friend. They need to experience conflict resolution and like how to deal with people when they're being difficult. Because what happens with only children is that they get into a rhythm with their parents where there's really not that much conflict, especially if you have like a good solid bond where the parents are able to kind of give them the things that they want or need. They're able to be respectful to their parents. There's not a lot of like issues going on. It's a very peaceful atmosphere in some cases. And they don't really experience what it's like to not get what you want. And that's not a selfish thing. It's like the conflict just doesn't come up. And I'm not going to like create a conflict for her. That seems weird. I'm not going to take away something that I could easily just give her because somebody tells me I have to. So you need to put them in situations where they're able to resolve conflicts with other kids their age. And I think sports are a really good way to do that because it shows them how to be a team and it shows them how to deal when their thoughts aren't chosen, like when they're not the leader. School is another really important one. I mean, I know that there are some homeschooled only children, but I think even in those cases, they make sure to socialize with other homeschooled kids. Um, I don't think like getting them into daycare immediately is super important. I've read a lot of research that says the most important relationship for kids, like 3 and under, is with their parents. So you're trying to like give them a good bond and like an emotional support, and then you put them out into the world, and that is an important point too when you're with a baby. Like when you have a really small child, like under 2, and someone comes to you and says, they're an only child, they're going to be so spoiled. Like, aren't most 1-year-olds only children? Like when they're firstborns, like a lot of people are born without siblings and eventually get them. But like my 1-year-old isn't spoiled. They're new. They're brand new. So I think you got to give yourself a little bit of leniency, especially those first few years. Like most kids, many kids at least, don't have siblings yet at that point. But there's some really amazing things that can happen when you just have the one. Like for me, the most obvious one is the financial aspect where we're just able to do more stuff. Pierce is able to stay home. Um, we're able to like fit in smaller places. We have like this little teardrop trailer that we can all fit in. And one of us is always able to like kind of be with her while the other one does stuff. And there's just not a lot of like sacrifice in order to do the things we want to do. We don't have to like have one kid be with this parent, have the other kid with we can just both be there. So it creates this really unique like 3-person bond, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
It's easier to find a babysitter for one, like,
Yes.
there's also for me like the mental health aspect. So like if we can say that for a lot of moms, that first 6 months, 3 to 6 months, the 4th trimester is emotionally and mentally really taxing. Knowing that I'm not going to have to do that again, knowing that I'm not going to have to go through pregnancy again, that's really freeing for me mentally. Kind of just being able to get back to myself and not have to sacrifice my body and my mental health again for another child. That's really good for me. It also allowed me to get back to work and really settle in, knowing that I'm not going to have to do another maternity leave. In America, that's not an easy thing on your professional life.
Yeah, Ashley and I are moving to Copenhagen, so.
Oh, really? Okay, take me with you. So there's just like a lot of benefits, I think. And again, it begs the question, like, am I selfish because I need those things or because I want those things or because I see the value in those things? And I don't think I am, because I don't see anything that proves to me that she is in any way at a deficit because of them.
Mhm.
So like
Mhm.
if all of the research says that only children are just fine, and the only thing I'm working against is like these outdated stereotypes, I can live with that. I'm fine with
Mm.
it. I'm just going to continue to value my own mental health and what what's best for us. And I'm just going to have to believe that those stereotypes will eventually fade away into obscurity.
Mm. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Again, I'm just fresh out of therapy, so I'm feeling confident.
And it shows, girlfriend. You're
It's
just
showing
like,
you're glowing.
you're
You
just
got that therapy glow.
glowing. You're just like got
You
a
know,
bag of cereal in the background that I keep eyeing that I really want. Like, ooh.
yeah, it's true. In therapy too, it can go sometimes when you're having a really intense session, sometimes you leave and you're like,
Yes.
I need to go get 3 tacos from Taco Bell and lay in
Yes.
bed.
Mm.
So the fact that you're kind of in your Oprah Super Soul Sunday moment is really good for me. I'm loving it.
I just feel very much at peace with the situation, and it's what I hope for our listeners and for our followers. I just hope that you can find um, a moment where you can say to yourself, like, I need to mute all of these external voices that are not mine and that are not my
Mhm.
spouse's and that are not my child's. And I need to focus on what's best for the 2 or 3 of us. There's a lot of single parents out there too. I don't want to discount them. But I need to focus on what's best for us and our family. And
Yeah.
I need to realize that what's best for another family might not match that. And that's totally
Yeah.
okay. There's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that. Like, we do get a lot of comments being like, well, families with multiple kids, we have really good bonds too. And it's like, that's great. I think that's
Yeah.
wonderful. I don't
Mhm.
think there's anything
Yeah.
wrong with that. I just wish that as much as we allow other families to be just as they are, that people could give that kind of same acceptance to one and done families.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally.
Well, and I want to just really quick honor you, Jess, because you said I'm at peace with that decision, and I just want to affirm the hard work it took to get there and to really just honor the inner healing and work that you did to get to that place. Because I think on the outside, we can see that peace you have and think, well, how did she get there? How did she get to that peace? But we know that it took a lot of hard work. It took a lot of boundary setting. It took a lot of inner reflection. It took a lot of that allowing yourself that time. And so we just want to affirm too that the work that you're doing and that you're creating is done because you've done that hard work yourself. And
Oh,
so
thank you.
sending you all the virtual hugs and high fives and bags of cereal from here, and just really affirming that, the place where you're at right now took a lot to get to, and it's commendable. And so just
Thank
know
you.
that we see it.
That's really, really
So,
nice. Thank you. And I have to take that shout out and send a lot of it to the folks who have allowed themselves to be vulnerable with me.
yeah.
Our show
Yes.
is like an email question and answer type of show. So each week we read emails from people who are kind of in that same space of deciding whether to be one and done or having made the decision or having it be made for them. And I get to read these stories, these just incredibly powerful, strong people who have overcome NICU stays or health trauma. And I just get to be in a space with them. And I'm really, really fortunate that they've allowed themselves to share. I think the more that we're able to talk about the good stuff and the bad stuff, we can all feel a little bit more supported. And it doesn't, I always worry that people are going to be like, Jess, I'm so sorry, but I've decided to have another. And I'm going to be like, no, 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 no. I am so happy for you. Like, yes, live your truth. Do whatever you want to do. This is not a space for deciding what family is right for you at all. This is a space for supporting where you're at right now, where you want to be. So I just think this community that has found me, they have given me a ton of strength. And I'm so thankful for them every day.
Yeah. So good.
That's so amazing. Oh, I'm like your number one fan. This is so cool. I mean, it's always such a pleasure to meet people, but it's like always such like it's a crapshoot. It's like a beautiful gift and we unwrap it and it's a total surprise every time we do these. So this is so fun.
So fun.
I have a million questions for you. We'll have to do another episode or something.
Absolutely. I would love to come on anytime and have both of you on my show.
That'd be fun. You know, we love to talk. So we'll be there.
Yeah, right. You've barely gotten to talk at all.
Oh boy. Well, that's just anyway. I wonder, how can you share with our listeners, how can mamas from our sisterhood who are walking this journey, this decision point of believing that one and done is part of their story, how can they connect with you?
Well, I'm most active on Instagram. So at Only You Podcast is where you can find me. I try to respond to every message, but it's getting a little out of control. So, give me 2 to 3 business weeks or something. So definitely find me there. We also have a discussion page that I like to put up there. So if I post something and people want to talk about it, you can go there. But you can find us also on our website, onlyyoupodcast.com. There's links there to where you can listen to us, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. There's also a Patreon. So if you join our Patreon at the $5 level or above, you're actually invited to join us on a monthly mental health happy hour. So we have a group chat that's been really fun. But we all get together and we kind of talk about like what's been going on lately. Sometimes it's like a very cathartic, meaningful, joyous conversation, and other times we literally just talk about like what's up, like what have you been doing, somebody's doing like remodeling their house or whatever, like it's a varied subjects, but that's where you can find me. I'm also on Facebook at Only You, a One and Done podcast, and I would say I'm on Instagram every single day, so if you want to somehow connect with me, go there.
I love that.
We'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes too, mamas, so that you can get direct access to Jess and Only You.
Believe me, you'll find me.
I love it. Well, Jess, thank you again for being so vulnerable. And ultimately, thank you for the work that you do and the community that you are creating for families who choose to only have one, whether that was a choice or a decision made for them. You are really, truly creating a safe space for community. And so thank you for the work that you're doing. It's an honor to share the internet space with you.
Absolutely. And right back at you.
Thank you. And to the mamas listening who are on this family building journey and who are daily faced with the question or the thought of what does growing your family look like, we hope that this episode affirms that, mama, you know what's best for your family, and it's only you who can make that decision, and you will make the right decision. And so no matter where you find yourself, no matter the pressures you may feel, we hope that you offer yourself that moment to really sit and ask yourself, what do you want your family to look like? What does it look like in that 5-year picture that Jess illustrated? And we hope that you offer your heart that space and that time to do that. So know that, mama, no matter how your family grows or if your family grows, you are loved just as you are, and your kid ultimately knows your love. So we love having you guys here on the podcast. Thank you as always for being a part of the sisterhood, and we will catch you guys next week. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Dear NICU Mama podcast.
If you loved this episode, we'd be so grateful for a review on any of the podcast platforms.
And we'd love to continue connecting with you via our social media pages or a private Facebook group. And ultimately, NICU Mama, welcome to the sisterhood.